Ice Cube has done with the Big Three League here, taking the 3-on-3 format back to basketball's roots, is going into the community of each city as they've come through here.
Ice Cube's Big Three Basketball League, it all starts up again this weekend.
A basketball league valued at $290 million. A ticker symbol, Tont, waiting on the New York Stock Exchange. A catalog of records that still pays him every single day, decades after the song stopped being new. Nearly 40 films, many of them owned, not just acted in, and a production company that lets him collect from the back end while the studios collect from the front. That is the portfolio of a man most people still file under the word rapper. But there is a number underneath all of those numbers that almost no one is reporting correctly. And once you see it, you stop seeing a celebrity entirely. You start seeing an architect. The Untold Side. This is a channel about black wealth, power, and legacy, told the way the headlines never tell it. Not the gossip, not the noise, the ownership. And we are not telling you the story you have already heard 100 times. You know the rapper, you know the movies. We are telling you the second act, the quiet one. So, if you care about how culture turns into capital, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is the version of the story that actually matters. The South Central Blueprint. He was born O'Shea Jackson on June 15, 1969, on Van Wyck Street in South Central Los Angeles. His father, Hosea, kept the grounds at UCLA. His mother, Doris, worked as a custodian and a hospital clerk. This was a working-class household that prized discipline and education, and it sat in the middle of a neighborhood that offered very little margin for error. When O'Shea was 12 years old, his half-sister was murdered. That kind of loss marks a person early. It tells you, before you are even a teenager, that the world is not safe and that nothing is promised. By 14, he was writing rhymes in school notebooks, turning the streets he watched every day into language. Reporting suggests he sold his very first song when he was just 16 years old, to a future member of N.W.A. The talent was obvious early, and so was the instinct to treat his words as something with value, something that could be sold. But here is the detail that almost everyone skips, and it is the most important one in this entire story. After high school, Cube did not go straight into music. He enrolled at the Phoenix Institute of Technology in Arizona and earned a diploma in architectural drafting. Sit with that. Before he ever owned a single asset, he was trained to draw structures, to plan something on paper that could stand on its own and outlast the person who built it. That is not a coincidence. That is the operating system. Because here is the thesis that this entire video rests on. Fame depreciates. Ownership compounds. Most artists spend their whole lives chasing the first one. Cube was quietly building the second. The foundation years. The world met him through N.W.A. As one of the group's primary songwriters, he helped write the records that made West Coast hip-hop a cultural earthquake. The fame was instant. The influence was enormous. The money was not. In 1989, at the height of the group's rise, Ice Cube walked away. The reason was simple, and it is the hinge of his whole career. He felt he was not being paid fairly for what he was creating. Most people would call that a setback. Leaving the biggest group in the genre over a contract dispute sounds like career suicide. Therefore, it became the most valuable decision he ever made, because the lesson he took from it was permanent. If you create the value, you should own the value. He went solo and released America KK's Most Wanted in 1990, then Death Certificate, then The Predator. Records that were commercially successful and culturally heavy, and that are still streaming, still selling, still earning royalties more than 30 years later. Then Hollywood came calling. He made his film debut in Boys and the Hood in 1991, and the door swung open. But understand what this period really was. The albums and the early acting checks were real money. Conventional money, the kind almost any successful artist can earn. This was the foundation. It was never going to be the structure. The pivot to ownership. In 1995, two things happened that changed the trajectory completely. First, Cube co-wrote and starred in Friday, a low-budget comedy that became a cult classic and spawned an entire franchise. Second, and far more important, he founded a production company called Cube Vision with producer Matt Alvarez. This is the heart of everything, because a production company is not a vanity project. It is a machine for converting labor into ownership. Instead of simply being paid an acting fee and walking away, Cube could now produce. He could collect back-end profits, negotiate ownership stakes, and hold the rights to the things he made. Reporting indicates he owns much of his own catalog and the rights to the Friday franchise, which means he is still earning from work he created decades ago every time it streams, sells, or licenses. Watch how the math changes. When you are an actor, you get a check. When you are an owner, you get a check every time the asset moves for the rest of its life. Cube produced family comedies like Are We There Yet?, the Barbershop films, and eventually the Ride Along series. Ride Along alone reportedly grossed around $154 million on a budget of roughly $25 million. And Cube was not just the face. He was a producer with a stake in the upside. Then came the project that closed the loop. Cube Vision produced Straight Outta Compton, the N.W.A, a biopic with his own son, O'Shea Jackson Jr., playing a young Ice Cube on screen. Think about the symmetry there. The same group he once left over money, he now owned the story of. The icon had become the owner of his own myth. But even that was not the final form, because the biggest ownership play of his life was not in music or film at all. The headline asset. In 2017, Ice Cube did something that made a lot of smart people laugh at him. Alongside producer Jeff Quatinetz, he co-founded a professional 3-on-3 basketball league called the Big Three, built around former N.W.A. stars who still had something to prove, a rapper starting a basketball league. The reaction was predictable. People assumed it was ego. They were wrong, and they were about to be very wrong. For nearly a decade, the league did the unglamorous work. It built a broadcast relationship with CBS, the same network that carries the Super Bowl. It shifted from a touring all-star model toward city-based franchises with real local roots. By the most recent season, reporting indicated ratings had climbed more than 25% year over year, with playoff games reaching audiences in the hundreds of thousands. In 2024, the league reportedly sold its first city franchise in Los Angeles for around $10 million. But the climb was not smooth, and this is the part the headlines rarely sit with. According to reporting, the N.W.A. prohibits its own team owners from investing in the Big Three, which choked off one of the most obvious sources of capital a young league could tap. The resistance ran deep enough that, in 2023, the United States Department of Justice reportedly opened an inquiry into whether the N.W.A. was acting anti-competitively toward Cube's league. Read that again. The most powerful basketball institution in the world treated this so-called vanity project as something worth keeping at arm's length. Therefore, Cube did what he always does. He found another door. On June 12, 2026, came the headline that this entire video is built around. Ice Cube announced that the Big Three had reached an agreement to go public. The structure is a merger with a publicly traded special purpose acquisition company called Graph Global Corp. That vehicle had itself raised around $200 million when it went public in 2024. Money now aimed at fueling the league's expansion. The deal values the Big Three at $290 million on a pre-money basis. The combined company is expected to list in the fourth quarter of 2026 on a major exchange under the ticker symbol Tont, a nod to 3-on-3. If it closes as planned, the Big Three would become the first publicly traded professional sports league in United States history. Not the first team, the first league. That is the structure the drafting student was always trying to build. Secondary holdings. The league is the marquee, but it sits on top of a deep and diversified base. And this is where you separate a wealthy entertainer from an actual mogul. Start with the catalog. His N.W.A. work and his solo albums, AmeriKKK's Most Wanted, Death Certificate, The Predator, and more, continue to generate streaming royalties, publishing income, and sync licensing every time the music appears in a film, a show, or a commercial. As one of the most sampled and referenced voices of his era, he earns whether or not he ever records another bar. Then there is Cube Vision itself, an operating business with first look and multi-year arrangements with major studios, a library of produced films and television, and a development slate that reportedly includes a long-awaited fourth Friday film. That is not a paycheck. That is an income-producing asset with employees and a pipeline. Add the brand ventures, like his Solo by Cube apparel line, and selective on-brand endorsement work with companies whose image fits his own rather than chasing every check. And yes, there is real estate. Reporting has tied him to high-value Los Angeles property including a Marina del Rey home reported in the range of $7 million. I am hedging that figure deliberately because property details are often imprecise in the press, and frankly, the real estate is the least interesting part of this story. For most celebrities, the mansion is the headline. For Cube, it is a footnote that tells you everything about how he built this. The equity layer. Now let's talk about what going public actually means, because this is where the icon-to-owner thesis pays off completely. Under the agreement, 100% of the Big Three's existing equity is expected to convert into stock of the combined public company. Crucially, the existing leadership is expected to stay in control. Reporting indicates Cube continues as Chief Executive Officer, with Sean Bannon remaining as president and Hall of Famer Clyde Drexler staying on as commissioner, while veteran executive Mark King joins as chairman of the board. Cube is not cashing out and walking away. He is opening the doors while keeping the keys. And here is the part that fits this channel's entire reason for existing. The Big Three has been certified as a Black-owned business. By taking it public through this route rather than through traditional venture capital, Cube is doing something almost no one in sports has done. He is letting ordinary fans, including Black investors and the communities that built the culture, buy actual equity in a professional sports league. In his own words to the press, most leagues are owned by a handful of billionaires, and all the fans get to do is watch, buy merchandise, and bet on the games. They can't invest in the upside. He wants to change that. Think about the historical weight of that. Black athletes make up the overwhelming majority of N.W.A. rosters, yet Black ownership at the league level has been almost non-existent. Cube is not asking for a seat at someone else's table. He built a new table, and now he is selling chairs to the public. That is not charity, that is architecture. If you are getting value from this breakdown, take 1 second and subscribe, because we cover exactly these kinds of ownership moves every single week. Now, let's talk about the long game. Brand and operating businesses. What separates Cube from a one-hit entrepreneur is that none of these ventures stand alone. They feed each other. Cube Vision gives him a media engine. The Big Three gives him a sports and broadcast platform. His music keeps his name culturally relevant across generations, which in turn makes the league more marketable and the brand more bankable. He still tours major amphitheaters and festivals, and those live performance fees feed back into the same flywheel that funds everything else. And the league itself is being built like a real operating business, not a novelty. There is a network television deal. There is a shift toward city-based franchises in major markets, the kind of local roots that turn casual viewers into loyal fans. There is a commissioner with a Hall of Fame resume and a management team with serious sports and media experience. He has even used the league as a barrier-breaking platform, at one point publicly reported to have offered a multi-million-dollar deal to bring a marquee women's basketball star into the Big Three. Whether or not that ever happens, it shows the instinct. Always be expanding the footprint. Always be growing the asset. That is the difference between fame and infrastructure. Fame is a moment. Infrastructure is a machine that keeps running while you sleep. The legacy lever. Now we get to the part that reframes the whole thing. When Cube talks about the Big Three, he does not talk about this year. He talks about 100 years. He has said, plainly, that he wants the league to be around for a century, not just the 9 seasons it has played so far. That is not the language of a man chasing a payday. That is the language of a man building something to outlive him. And the decision to go public is the clearest expression of that vision. By converting the league into a publicly owned company, Cube is doing something with a multiplier effect. He is creating a vehicle where the people who love the game can build equity alongside him. He is turning fans into shareholders, spectators into stakeholders. Consider what that does over a generation. A young person who buys a few shares is not just a viewer anymore. They have a reason to follow the league, to evangelize it, to care whether it grows. Their interest becomes ownership, and ownership becomes the kind of generational wealth that compounds quietly over decades. Cube has essentially designed a pipeline that lets the culture invest in itself. That is the highest form of the thesis. Fame would have let him cash a check and disappear. Ownership lets him hand the blueprint to everyone watching. He is not just keeping the wealth, he is distributing the mechanism that creates it. The life now. Today, Ice Cube is 57 years old and lives in Los Angeles, the same city that raised him. He has been married to Kimberly Woodruff, since 1992, one of the longest and most respected marriages in all of entertainment. And the two of them raised 5 children, including the son who played him on the big screen. He is, by reported estimates, worth somewhere in the range of $160 million. Not a billionaire. He will tell you that himself. But he is a chief executive officer steering a league toward the public markets, a producer with a studio relationship, an artist with a catalog that never stops earning, and the architect of a piece of American sports history. The kid from Van Wyck Street who studied how to draw structures grew up and built one that is about to ring the opening bell. The synthesis. So let's return to where we started. A basketball league valued at $290 million, headed for the public market under the ticker Tont, a catalog that still pays. Nearly 40 films, many of them owned. A production company that collects from the back end, and a personal fortune reported around $160 million, built almost entirely on a single repeated decision: own the thing. Don't just star in it. The title of this video says he owns a basketball league. Let's cash that in properly, because it means more than the buildings or the teams. What Cube actually owns is access. He owns the deed to a league. He owns the machine that turns a game into equity. And in the fourth quarter of 2026, if everything closes as planned, he will own a piece of history that no entertainer and no athlete in this country has ever held before. The first publicly traded sports league in America. When he pitched the public on the deal, his message was almost defiant in its simplicity. "Look at the whole career," he said, "from the music to the movies to this, and bet on Cube." Coming from most people, that would be bravado. Coming from the man who turned a Walkout, a drafting diploma, and a so-called vanity league into a piece of Wall Street history, it sounds less like a boast and more like a track record. He did not get there by being the most famous man in the room. The fame was always going to fade. He got there by being the only one in the room who understood that fame depreciates and ownership compounds. The icon became the owner, and now he is letting everyone else own a piece too. I want to hear from you in the comments, and pick any of these. 1. Would you actually buy stock in the Big 3 when it lists under Tont? 2. Which was the smarter move? Founding CubeVision back in 1995 or taking the league public in 2026? 3. Who is the better blueprint for icon to owner, Ice Cube or someone else you have in mind? And 4. What does black ownership at the league level mean to you? Drop your answer below. And if this reframed how you see one of the most underrated business minds in entertainment, subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week we are breaking down another untold story of black ownership that the headlines completely missed.